Oh, Melissa, if you want to, you can right click on your name. I think it's just signed in as my name since we use the same login. But you can, I think, right click it and rename yourself if you want to.
Oh, and the participants?
Yeah, if you like hover over your name and right
Yeah.
click it, there's a rename option. Yeah. I don't know if you see it.
My computer will work.
Melissa, we're gonna make you also a co-host.
Okay.
We have both of you being co-hosts.
Yeah, definitely won't let me.
You know what, Melissa? I might be able to. Let's see. Thought maybe I was able to
Rename it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, if you could. I don't think I have the ability.
Oh, I see it now under more. Okay. All right.
All right. You are renamed. Do you want to wait a little bit longer for the rest of the attendees? Would you like to start?
I'm good with whatever.
Yeah, whatever is best for you all.
Well, it is recorded, so if they want to, they can always go back.
Okay.
Sounds good.
We have with us Olivia, Reda, Volunteer Engagement Coordinator, Alliance for the Great Lakes, and Melissa Bocek, Volunteer Alliance Ambassador for the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So if you guys would like to go ahead and start your presentation, that would be great.
Great. Thank you, Bridget. And big thanks to National Biodiversity Teach-In for having us. And thanks to Melissa for presenting with me. Super happy to be here today with you all. Like Bridget said, we're here with Alliance for the Great Lakes. The Alliance for the Great Lakes is a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we are headquartered in Chicago, but we do work and have folks working with us all over the Great Lakes. And we work to protect the Great Lakes for today and well into the future for all of the life that relies on it. We started, the organization began in 1970 as the Lake Michigan Federation, and then in the early 2000s, in 2006 was renamed Alliance for the Great Lakes. And our work now, like I said, spans all over the region. And today we are here to talk to you all about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes, which has a big impact on topics like biodiversity that this teach-in is talking about. So like they've introduced us as, I'm Olivia Reda, I'm the Volunteer Engagement Coordinator with Alliance for the Great Lakes, and I'm joined today by Melissa, one of our fantastic Alliance ambassadors, and we're both going to tell you all a little bit about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes today. So just a little overview of what we'll be talking about. First, we'll get into the importance of protecting this ecosystem, why it's so important that we do work to protect the Great Lakes, some work that we do at Alliance for the Great Lakes to address different issues affecting the Great Lakes. And then we'll get into plastic pollution. So we'll look at how much plastic pollution is out there, how this plastic is moving around in the environment, what kind of impacts it's having, and lastly, some actions that you all can take and that we can take as community members to address this topic. So I'll hand things over to Melissa to tell you all a little bit about the importance of this ecosystem.
All right, as you'll see in the slide, there's some little diagrams there for you and some background facts going along with the one on, it should be your left, it's my left here. The largest surface freshwater system in the world is the Great Lakes. 97% of the world is saltwater, but the remaining 3% is made up of glaciers, which covers 2%, and then of the remaining 1%, is fresh water, and then the 18% is held within the Great Lakes themselves. So it's one of the larger components of that remaining 1% of fresh water. And it covers the continental US in 9.5 feet of water if you were to spread it out over the surface area. Just to kind of give you guys a frame of reference when it comes to how much volume is held in the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes contains 90% of the North America's surface freshwater, and that's roughly about 20% of the planet's freshwater overall. Freshwater is a precious resource. It's not something that is easily renewable. And so we do need to make sure that we do protect it because it is vital to human existence as well as, other living creatures and the environment. So it is a human right, and it's something that's essential for all of our existence on this planet. Drinking water, the Great Lakes does provide drinking water to over 40 million people. That's 1 in 10 people in the US and 1 in 4 people in Canada. And it's important to protect this resource to ensure communities have access to safe, clean drinking water. All right, you'll see in this slide, there's several different species. I know that I probably won't pronounce the plants correct, but it's important for us to protect these various resources for all of the communities that rely on it, but also for other species that call the ecosystem home, as you can see here by the photos. The Great Lakes region is home to 3,500 different species of plants and animals, including 170 species of fish. If you guys want to go ahead and throw in, if you're available to do that in the chat, what your favorite Great Lakes species is, or your favorite activity that's tied into the Great Lakes, we definitely would be interested in hearing that. There are 180 invasive species within the area. One of the invasive species enters the Great Lakes and then affects the ecosystem, and because everything is related through the chains, then it just trickles down into everything. So one tiny species can have an effect over the entire area. See, I've lost my spot. It's important that we protect these resources, not only for all the communities that rely on it, but also for the plants and wildlife in the region. You'll see over on the right side, that would be the lake sturgeon. Then you have the Fowler's toad, the painted turtle, and then the plant that I probably won't pronounce correctly, but it's a hairy puccoon. Is that right, Olivia? Thank you. And then the great blue heron, which I'm very familiar of growing up on the Channel Lakes. And then we have the piping plover.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So now we'll get into a little bit about some of the work we do at Alliance for the Great Lakes to protect all the communities that Melissa mentioned, so many folks relying on the Great Lakes for drinking water, and also all of the really neat species that rely on this ecosystem as well. So here at the Alliance, we are working to conserve and restore the world's largest freshwater resource using policy education and local efforts to ensure healthy Great Lakes and clean water for generations of all people and wildlife. So big goals, how do we do that? We tackle different issues affecting the Great Lakes from a lot of different approaches. So we work in advocacy and leadership. So we partner with communities and decision makers to help find solutions for Great Lakes issues and to help make progress towards those solutions. We also do a lot of education and action. So we involve thousands of folks with our work each year. We're lucky to have a lot of support. We have volunteer programs that folks are taking part in, such as our Adopt a Beach cleanup program. We also have a lot of amazing Alliance ambassadors, such as Melissa, that are helping to work towards solutions and raise awareness about the Great Lakes. And we also do research and analysis. So we inform community leaders and guide policy to protect the Great Lakes. So we're doing research and analysis on different topics like affordable drinking water and related topics as well. So each year, the Alliance for the Great Lakes releases federal policy priorities. So that's part of our advocacy and leadership that we do in the Great Lakes area. So these are the top 3 asks that we have this year. And these are things that we want to see Congress and the current administration do to help protect the Great Lakes. So our first one is we want to see that water infrastructure and water equity are funded. So all of the pipes and water infrastructure, drinking water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, so all the different infrastructure that is moving the water around in the Great Lakes, getting us access to our drinking water. A lot of that infrastructure is outdated, crumbling. We have a lot of lead service lines that can pose a lot of health risks. and a lot of funding is needed to address that issue. So it's estimated that over $188 billion in the Great Lakes region is needed over the next 20 years to help address this issue. So we're asking for funding to go towards this issue, and we're also asking that dollars prioritize disadvantaged communities when we're addressing this issue as well. The second item, funding Great Lakes restoration at $400 million, touches on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And that initiative helps provide funding for on-the-ground efforts. So for things like wetland restoration or hot toxic area cleanup, things like that, that is funneling money towards that. So we're asking that at least $400 million gets allocated this year for those efforts. The last one touches on the topic of invasive species, which Melissa brought up a little bit earlier. So we're asking that Congress and the current administration fully fund invasive carp protection. So invasive carp are an invasive species that are about 50 miles out of Chicago. And if they were to, they're not currently in the Great Lakes, but if they were to establish in the Great Lakes, it would have a lot of negative impact. So a species like invasive carp can outcompete native species. So they're taking away resources from those native species and ultimately can decrease biodiversity and have a lot of other impacts. So we're asking for full funding for those protections. And now we'll get into plastic pollution. So first, we're going to look at just how big is this issue, how much is out there, and I'll let Melissa kick us off with that.
All right, you'll see in this diagram from University News, which is based out of the Rochester Institute of Technology. Since the 1950s, the production and consumption of plastic has increased exponentially. Research from the Institute of Technology in Rochester estimates that over 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes annually. This is based upon a mathematical model, which is based off the population and percentage of waste mismanaged, as well as a hydraulic model to help predict the spatial distribution of plastic debris in the Great Lakes. Breakdowns according to the lakes, the various lake regions. Lake Michigan has 5,000 metric tons. Lake Erie has 2,500 metric tons. Lake Ontario has 1,400 metric tons. And then Lake Huron has 600 metric tons. Lake Superior has 32 metric tons. And you'll see this is just one of the maps that's provided here. All right, you can see the magnitude of the problem of plastic pollution show up in the Adopt-A-Beach. And this is just some percentages again to give you. This data is from 2019, but typically the numbers tend to be fairly similar year to year. So there's not much change. That's why Adopt-A-Beach is here, but you know, it takes all sorts of people to make a great change. The pie graphs show how much litter data is collected that season, which is composed of plastic, and around 90% was found on the beach, which, you know, again, was plastic.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So like Melissa said, our Adopt-A-Beach program, we see the impacts of plastic pollution all the time throughout our season of beach cleanups, which we'll be starting back up again soon. But as you can see in this photo here, a lot of what we're finding is really small plastic. So a lot of folks coming to these cleanups expect to see a lot of really large litter, which does happen, but we oftentimes see a lot of what's shown in this photo here. You'll kind of see just like little different color variations in the sand, and eventually you get an eye for it and you see all these little plastic pieces. So it's really, once it's hitting the environment, it's not really going away unless it's intentionally removed. It's kind of just breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually not being seen by, you know, without any assistance. They become microplastics and even smaller. So like I said, the problem doesn't really go anywhere, it just kind of breaks up down into smaller and smaller pieces, continuing to pose a lot of issues. So this graph here was from a study that looked at, it was taking samples from the surface of the water in open Great Lakes and in tributaries going into the Great Lakes. And I bring this up because once the plastic's in the environment, the environment kind of has different impacts on the plastic itself. And that can influence how it's impacting wildlife, how it's impacting our drinking water, all kinds of things. So the two graphs here, or the graph here on the left shows the composition of samples that are different types of items in open water Great Lakes. So as you can see, the top type of item was fragments, whereas on the right in the tributaries, the top type of item that was found in the surface samples was fibers and line. So fishing line, different synthetic fibers. So one thing to note here is that these fibers are negatively buoyant. So when they're in the open water, that would often be sinking to the bottom, whereas in a tributary with more movement within the water, they could often float to the top and be captured in a surface sample. So all this to say is that once the plastic's in the water, different things are happening to it. So for example, those fibers, if they're sinking to the water in the open water, benthic organisms could be eating those fibers, making its way up the food chain, all different types of effects. So just keeping that in mind is another factor when talking about plastic pollution. And then I'll let Melissa explain a little bit more about how we find a lot of tiny trash, like I mentioned, in our Adopt a Beach cleanups.
Okay, you'll see in the this graph, it emphasizes the fact that much of what we find on the beach is very small pieces of tiny plastic. You'll see right here it is 42%. The next highest would be food related, and that's probably going to contribute to our link back to the styrofoam and the food wrappers and the cups and straws and all that before it breaks down. And then after that, you have smoking related and then apparel. Oftentimes, you find the plastic, it is only going to be 2.5 centimeters, and it is largely made of, again, foam, plastic, and glass. You may not, like Olivia had stated earlier, you tend not to see it until you start seeing it all the time, whether it be an adopted beach or on your own. If you're doing your own cleanup, you start to gather an eye for it.
Okay, now we're going to look at, once again, what happens to this plastic once it's in the environment. So Melissa is going to tell us a little bit about how it's breaking up once it's out there.
All right. Often the release of plastic in the first place is, or it's used in the first place, is because it is so durable, and it's used across the board in pretty much all products. Unfortunately, the durability means that it does not break down that well, and once it's in the environment, it's there for quite a long time. Plastic doesn't go away, it just breaks down into those smaller pieces like we've talked about through photo degradation and mechanical breakdown. The degradation process of plastics is very slow and inefficient, and is further complicated by the fact that the materials are in the water. So the process that involves sun rays incorporating oxygen molecules into plastic, which makes the plastic brittle, and then it becomes more and more brittle as time goes on, and then it's easier to break down into small pieces that you find on the beach. Since sunlight and oxygen are less available underwater, this process takes even longer. So the fact that the garbage is in the water to begin with is a problem, but then the fact that it's being, submerged by the water makes it even worse. The difference from biodegradation, which involves decomposition of organic materials by microorganisms. So there's nothing really there to attack it, and because it's so durable, that it's the same thing as an invasive species.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Yeah, like Melissa said, if you haven't gathered that from a presentation, the plastic is sticking around in the environment for a long, long time. So on that note, we're going to do a short little activity. So in these next few slides, we have a few different items that you might find at an Adopt a Beach cleanup or not, just some different litter items, or just items you are aware of. And we'd like you to go ahead and try to order these items from the item that you think takes the shortest amount of time to break up in the environment, all the way until the item that you think takes the longest time to degrade in the environment. So the first item should be what you think would break up quickest, and then all the way until the item that you think would stick in the environment and take the longest time to break down. So go ahead and put your guesses in the chat if you're able to. I'll give a minute or two per slide, and then we'll go over the answers and see if it's what you thought or if there's any surprises with the outcome. And the amount of time that we'll list here is, like Melissa said, the amount of time it's taking to photodegrade if it's a synthetic object. So it's incorporating oxygen molecules into the item and becoming brittle and breaking down. So we already got some guesses coming in. I'll give another minute or so. Okay, let's go ahead and try to order these items. So I'll give a guess in the chat, a couple guesses in the chat. Let's see if I think they're the same except for the last two switched, it looks like. So we have a guess of newspaper, plywood, plastic takeout, and then plastic lids. And then the second guess being newspaper, plywood, and then reversing last two plastic lid takeout containers. So let's see what we got here. So the first guess of newspaper is correct. That's taking about 1.5 months. Second object being the plywood, which was also correct, 1 to 3 years. And then we have our two plastic items. Let's see which came first. A plastic takeout container, 50 to 80 years, and our lids at 400 years. So both of those sticking in the environment a long, long, long time. So great guesses on those. Okay, our next series of items is a banana peel, a plastic straw, a plastic bottle, and some wool socks. So we'll give another minute or two to try and order those and see how those shake out. And once again, feel free to put your guesses in the chat. Okay, any other guesses to put in the chat real quick before we reveal the answers? Okay, so we have a guess in the chat going with banana peel, wool socks, plastic straw, and plastic water bottle. So let's see if that is correct. So we have the first item breaking down at 2 to 5 weeks of the banana peel. So that is correct. Then we have our wool socks at 1 to 5 years. So as you can see, these first items have more organic material, are breaking down through biodegradation, like Melissa mentioned with the banana peel. And then we have our plastic straws at 50 to 100 years and plastic water bottle at 450 years. So great guess in the chat. You were correct on all those items. But once again, the plastic really sticking around in the environment. Okay, our last series of items, we have our paper towels, plastic bag, foam cup, and diapers. So go ahead and give your guess for those in the chat. These are great guesses. You guys are killing it. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go over these ones. Our guest in the chat is the first one being the paper towels, then diapers, then plastic bag and foam cup. So like, let's see how these work out. So the first guess is correct, 2 to 4 weeks for the paper towels. And then we have our plastic bags at 10 to 20 years. Our foam cup at 50 years. And our diapers at 450 years. So I think surprisingly, the diapers might take longer than you think. I believe they have a lot of kind of plastic incorporated into them. So those are also sticking in the environment a long time. Thank you all so much for participating in that. Hopefully that shines some perspective on how those items are interacting in the environment. Okay, so now let Melissa tell you a little bit about how ocean plastic pollution differs from Great Lakes plastic pollution.
All right, so when it comes to the Great Lakes and plastic pollution, very little research has been done if you compare it to ocean plastic debris. It is important to think about how ocean plastic pollution differs from Great Lakes plastic pollution and the difference and how the differences influence impact of plastic pollution in the ecosystems. So ocean versus plastic pollution, the water is used differently. Very little or no drinking water comes from the ocean, but nearly 40 million people drink Great Lakes water. Microplastics are even making their way past water treatment facilities now because they are so microscopic, and they are finding them in various different ways. Ocean and Great Lakes plastic pollution travels differently. Ocean debris washes up from far away at places due to global ocean currents, but Great Lakes plastic does not, and it flows out from shorelines because that's where you leave it, and then it really doesn't have any way of getting out of the cycle once it's in there. The water also has different physical properties. Salt water is more dense than fresh water, and currents are different in the ocean in the Great Lakes. Unlike parts of the Great Lakes, the ocean never freezes, and all of these factors influence how plastic pollution moves through the water and how it breaks down. Oh.
Oh, I just realized I'm on mute. Thanks, Melissa. Now we're gonna talk a little bit about the impact. So we know a lot of plastic pollution is out there. We know it's making its way into the environment's interacting with it in different ways. So now we're gonna look at how this plastic pollution is impacting communities, wildlife, and the environment. So I'll let Melissa tell you a little bit about how it's impacting wildlife that's out there.
Okay, so all the different data that we've mentioned before, we know there's a lot of plastic in the Great Lakes. If we haven't expressed enough, there's a lot of plastic. So some of the ways that we're seeing the effects of these different waste is you'll see over on the left, fish actually has a plastic bag wrapped around it. And then the more well-known ways of like fishing lines and lures and fishing poles that get pulled out on accident, those are also a danger to birds and fish. And these things stay in the ecosystem and they affect everything in the ecosystem, including the wildlife and the people. And these are some of the devastating results that you see when it comes to the environment, wildlife, and communities. All right, and then is this yours or mine?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about how it continues to affect wildlife through ingestion. So like Melissa mentioned, plastic debris can entangle wildlife, impact their ability to move around, to find food, but they also are ingesting plastic pieces. So this is very concerning because plastic inherently has chemicals in it, but it can also absorb chemicals within the water, and then wildlife are ingesting those chemicals. Also, the plastic that they're ingesting is taking up room that could otherwise be taken up by nutritious food that they would normally be eating. This can have catastrophic effects, especially on larval fish, small fish, where a single thread could be deadly. So it's really, really important that their stomachs it's being taken up by nutritious food that they're supposed to be eating rather than these plastic pieces. So this image here is from a National Geographic article called Little Pieces, Big Problems. This was a study or an images taken off the coast of Hawaii. So it is in an ocean environment, but a similar concept can be used to think about how this problem is seen in the Great Lakes. So these images I thought were just kind of highlighted this topic well. You can see these were like off oily slicks on the surface of the water where a lot of larval fish are eating or feeding, other fish are feeding. So as you can see in these images, there's a lot of items that would be food for fish or other wildlife in the water mixed in with a lot of plastic. So if these organisms are feeding on these slicks of water, they're likely also ingesting a lot of plastic. So these images, I think, kind of highlight that well. So plastics also having a lot of human impacts. A lot more needs to be known about this topic, but I'll let Melissa tell you all a little bit about that.
Okay, so like Olivia said, more research does need to be done to fully understand the human impact on the Great Lakes when it comes to plastic pollution. But we're already seeing evidence of it in various different ways throughout the food chain and into the human body. We know there's plastics in drinking water, both surface and ground sources have shown plastic, as well as bottled water, beer, and sea salt. We consume plastic fibers almost all the time. We also know there is plastic in seafood, such as fish, mussels, and shrimp, because they're ingesting it, and then the human ingests the seafood. And then humans are ingesting microplastics, and there has been evidence that microplastics are showing up in poop. There's no other way to say it. So a study found that polypropylene and polyethylene terephthalate, which was found in stool samples by different participants in the study. And these plastics are very commonly used in plastic bottles and caps. All right, and the community impacts, litter and plastic impacts the community as well. When it comes to litter decrease, litter actually decreases property values by 7%, according to KAB.org. And then when it comes to beachgoers and your summertime activity, people will obviously avoid the littered beaches and spend time and additional money and resources going to different beaches in the area that are much more clean or void of any litter. And that is according to NOAA.gov.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So now we've talked a lot about this topic and how this issue affects communities, wildlife, humans. So now we're going to look a little bit about solutions to this topic, or rather at least ways that we can help address it. So it'd be really great if we could just take a big net, go in the water, capture all the plastic or something of similar nature. Unfortunately, it's not possible to do something quite like that. But we can take a multi-pronged approach and approach this issue with a lot of different methods, a lot of different ways we can combat this issue. So one way is to collect the plastic once it's already in the environment. So this method can be pretty difficult based on a variety of different factors. One, it can be very expensive, require a lot of resources to be able to collect it once it's already out there. Also, like we mentioned, this plastic isn't like large pieces that you can easily just gather. It's often very small, it's often microscopic. So collecting it is difficult, poses a lot of problems. You need a lot of folks working on that, a lot of resources, like I mentioned. But you can, it is out there. So if we can remove it in different ways, that's one way to address this issue. So as you can see here, there's different nets, different filters, screens that are near stormwater drainage or wastewater treatment areas that's collecting that plastic before it's maybe ultimately making its way into the Great Lakes and getting into the waters and the lakes. There's also a lot of different products out there. So as you can see in the lower left, there's an interesting object there. It's called a Cora ball. And you can put that in when you're doing your laundry with your clothes. And that object will collect some of the synthetic fibers that's getting released from your clothing in the wash. And you can take that Cora ball out, remove the synthetic fibers, and then it's not making its way further into the water system. And then as you can see on the bottom right there, you can also take part, as we mentioned in our Adopt a Beach program, which involves removing litter from beaches so it's not making its way further into the environment. We can also look at different management strategies for plastic pollution. So making sure that plastic, after it's being used, is making its way to an area where we can easily collect it and it's not just making its way out into the water. So things like locking recycling bins, as you can see on the left there, instead of ones that can easily flap open in the wind or be knocked over in a storm on the beach and be dispersed everywhere, having different management strategies to make sure we're collecting the litter. You can also see on the right there, different ways to collect cigarette butts, which is one of our top items that we often see on the beach. So just having different management methods and making sure that these receptacles or other strategies are being strategically placed where this litter is often collecting or where folks are using plastic a lot. And then I'll let Melissa tell you a little bit more about another method of source reduction.
Okay, another way to reduce the issue of plastics used in the first place is public policy. And as you'll see here, there's two different headlines, and public policy has been successful all across the world and in the US to discourage and prohibit the use of plastic items such as plastic bags, bottles, straws, silverware, personal care items, and the list just goes on. Often found in these bans are fees and hybrids, and they can be used in a variety of methods to change behavior. Each community is different, so the policy that works in one location does not necessarily work in the identical way and needs to be tailored when it comes to a different location. Examples in the Great Lakes, Chicago uses plastic utensils upon request for takeout, and Ashtabula, I think it is, uses plastic straw by request solutions.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Yeah, like Melissa said, kind of preventing the plastic from ever making its way into the ecosystem is really a great method. Prevention is key a lot of times when talking about environmental issues. So another way to address this issue is through a lot of different individual actions that you all can also take part in. So one way in doing so is just looking for ways to live without less plastic, just to use less single-use plastic in your daily life. So we have some different resources on our website, but there's all kinds of resources from us and different partners working on similar issues. As you can see on the left there's a lot of suggestions for reusable items that could replace your use of single-use plastic in your day-to-day activities. So using reusable bags, using reusable water bottles. We understand that oftentimes, there's times when folks need to use plastic for different reasons, but whenever you can opt for reusable items, it's great to do so. We also, as we mentioned, have our Adopt a Beach program. So that's a way you can get involved with this issue directly. We have on our website our plastic-free Great Lakes pledge. If you go to greatlakes.org/takeaction, and that's a way to kind of pledge to hold yourself accountable and not use as much plastic, make some plastic reductions in your life. We also have our plastic-free Great Lakes toolkit on our website, which has a lot of great advocacy tips and ways to get involved in this issue. It has ways that you can, different ways to help you contact decision makers and express that this issue is really important and needs to be addressed, ways to help raise awareness, all kinds of tools to help you be an advocate for plastic-free Great Lakes. And then, as we mentioned many times, our Adopt a Beach program, I'll let Melissa tell you in a little more detail what that program looks like on the ground.
Okay, as far as the Adopted Beach program goes, that is a voluntary beach program that occurs at beaches all over the Great Lakes region. It was started as part of the International Coastal Cleanup in 1991, and at that time it was Illinois and Michigan specific. Because of the enthusiasm for the program, it launched year-round in 2003, and then it's grown to over 15,000 volunteers on beaches in all 5 Great Lakes and 8 Great Lakes states. All right, so when it comes to this, yep, you'll see here, the volunteers also collect data about what type of litter they're finding on the beaches. So a little bit of citizen science going on while you're doing the volunteer cleanup. This data helps us learn more about our beaches and shorelines and helps us influence the conversations on plastic and other litter in the region, and also nationally and on the international level. All right. And then spring kickoff is April 22nd to the 24th. You can sign up right at that link, adopt.greatlakes.org. And you can sign up to become a team leader, or you can just look to see what other signups are on the roster, and you can just go ahead and add yourself if it's not a private one. All right, and then the Great Lakes Alliance also has a curriculum from kindergarten all the way up through senior year of high school. It is a free curriculum. It's right on the website, greatlakes.org/education. And then the Great Lakes in My World curricula provides indoor and outdoor activities that you can find to integrate into your classroom. Again, all the lesson plans are free. There's an assessment rubric and then student journals that you can go ahead and print out.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Another way to take action with us on this issue is we have a lot of different opportunities for online advocacy. So you can spread the word online, spread the word, even if it's not online, just with your community, raise awareness through communications with your friends, family, community members. Talking about this issue and raising awareness is a really important step as well. We do have, as I mentioned, some different action alerts. You can take our plastics free Great Lake pledge at greatlakes.org/take action. And on the right here, you can see our newest action alert, which is the ability to tell Congress to protect the lakes and people who depend on them. So essentially, you're able to write Congress and decision makers, telling them that these items that we mentioned earlier, our federal priorities for the year, are important and that the Great Lakes need to be protected. So there's ways to do that through our website. Looking at our social media pages, we put out a lot of information and ways to get involved and learn more through those platforms as well. And that really kind of wraps up our presentation. Thank you, Melissa, for presenting. Thank you all for listening today. We really appreciate it and hope you learned a little something and feel empowered to help take action on this issue. So thank you all for listening in.
Looked like there were a few questions. Did you want me to read them off, or and then you answer and probably know better?
Sure. Yeah. Is that okay, Bridget, if we go into the Q&A, the questions here listed?
Yeah.
All right, so the first two are kind of similar. The first two are kind of similar, and then the question.
Hi. So we
feel empowered to take action on this issue. So thank you all for.
Looks like there were a few questions. Did you want me to read them off, or probably know better?
The first.
Sure. Yeah. Is that okay, Bridget, if we go into the Q&A, the questions you're listed? Bridget, it sounds like there might be like a slight delay. I don't know if there was audio from the webinar, but is it okay if we go into the questions? Okay, we'll go ahead. Melissa, did you want to go ahead and read them?
Sure. So the first two are kind of the same, and the questions are: has it been tracked how far out the plastic will go from the Great Lakes up through a tributary? So point of origin, Great Lakes, what's the farthest point you found plastic?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that so I guess the travel pattern of the plastic once it's in the environment, I think it could, travel pretty far. And as we have shown, even if it's not in its original form from start to finish, it's breaking up into pieces, and those pieces can really make their way all the way up, into our drinking water, past different treatment facilities, past all kinds of kind of different checkpoints. So I think the answer would kind of vary depending on the geography and depending on where the plastic's originating. But I think the kind of broad speaking answer would that it can travel very far in terms of, where it's starting, if it's in a tributary, making its way into the Great Lakes, if it's already in the Great Lakes, making its way into drinking water or into wildlife stomachs, or, all kinds of different pathways that it could possibly take.
All right, and just linking on to that, would you say that currents or wind or another force is the greatest contributor to plastic dispersal?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'll kind of take that back to the slide. So Melissa talked to you all a little bit about how ocean plastic pollution differs from Great Lakes plastic pollution. So I think in terms of currents and currents within the water, so that might be a little bit more of a factor when we're talking about ocean plastic pollution. So within the oceans, there's different global ocean currents that are really moving that plastic around all over the place. So plastic may have originated in a certain area, but it could be traveling quite a bit within the water. Whereas in the Great Lakes, we don't have that same type of pattern of, global ocean or global lake currents within the waters themselves. So a lot of the plastic pollution that we're seeing is locally derived. So humans are leaving it there, it's making its way into the water. So I think the travel patterns differ. What we might automatically think of in oceans ecosystems, it's a little different in the Great Lakes. But wind, all of those different mechanical forces are still having an impact, still making it travel, just maybe not in the same way as in the ocean.
All right. Are you aware of any groups that go out into the Great Lakes and remove surface trash from the water?
Great question. So I'm sure there are lots of folks that either do that kind of on their own time or do it as part of an organization. I don't know all of them by name, but I know that there's definitely folks that are doing that. In terms of our volunteers, I know we have had Adopt a Beach cleanups that have been in the water. So folks that are either divers and are diving in the water, removing litter from the water itself. But like I mentioned, I'm sure there's a lot of other partner organizations that are also removing litter from the water as well. Folks that are kayaking, folks that are boating, different things like that. I know that there's folks doing that great work as well.
What animal or amphibian population that you can think of is most affected by pollution?
That is a great question. And I don't think I have the answer to that. I know that all kinds of all wildlife is impacted in some way by this type of pollution. And like Melissa mentioned, it's kind of making its way through the food chain in various ways, but I don't know that I could say exactly which animal or amphibian is the most impacted. I think more research definitely needs to be done to know that.
All right, and then what is the most rewarding thing about doing cleanups in polluted areas from your perspective?
Another really great question. The most rewarding, I think it gives you perspective. So I think if you haven't done a cleanup like that before, a lot of folks, I think for me, one of the most rewarding aspects of cleaning up beaches is seeing folks clue in on the small plastic pieces, because a lot of times we get there and everyone's like, oh, the beach looks so clean, and a lot of times it is pretty clean, or maybe they just haven't yet seen the small plastic pieces. But I think seeing folks kind of get an eye for that and kind of gain a new awareness for how much that plastic is sticking around in the environment and how small it can get, and seeing that it really is all distributed throughout the beach once you kind of look for it is maybe gaining that new perspective, I think is rewarding. And then I would say also just meeting other community members in your area. I think it's really great whenever possible to interact with, I love interacting with different communities through the volunteer program. So kind of learning how folks connect with water, where they're coming from, you know, in speaking about the Great Lakes, how they connect with the ecosystem is really rewarding.
All right. Can plastics decompose in the ocean?
Great question. They sure can. I guess I don't know if the question means like completely decompose and go away, or if it just means like the decomposition that we talked about, the photodegradation. But to answer the question, it's definitely, as we talked about in the Great Lakes, how it's breaking down and degrading, that same, you know, thing is happening in ocean ecosystems as well, having similar impacts on environments in and around the oceans as well.
All right. What is your day-to-day life like doing this occupation?
Great question. My day-to-day life. So I'm as I mentioned, the volunteer engagement coordinator at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So I work directly with our volunteer program. So I work with our Adopt a Beach program and also the Alliance Ambassador program that Melissa is a part of. So I do a lot of communications with volunteers. I help plan and facilitate a lot of different events around Great Lakes issues. We also host a lot of trainings with ambassadors about different Great Lakes topics. So things like plastic pollution, environmental justice, water infrastructure. So I'm kind of part of raising awareness and part of the volunteer programs at the Alliance.
All right, and getting back to the beach cleanups, what do you do with the litter once it's collected?
Great question. So the litter that's collected at the beaches is disposed of on site. So all of our litter, well, first it's weighed. So we collect a lot of data, like Melissa mentioned, on our data cards. So we tally the different items we're finding on the beach. So we have, the Alliance for the Great Lakes has an historic record of all the litter data from our beach cleanups going back many years. So that data is important because it helps us talk about the issue. It helps us learn more about the issue. We share this data with a lot of other partners and other folks that are interested in this topic. But then once we're done gathering that data and information about the litter that's collected, it's then disposed of on site. So park districts and other folks helping to care for the beaches are really great, and they provide different trash and recycling receptacles on location, and that's what we use to dispose of everything.
All right, and then regarding one of the pictures that we showed with the fish and the pipers and that, do the nets at the end, oh, let me just slide back up really quick. Do the nets at the end ever catch fish and animals? And if so, what happens to the nets that entrap these wildlife?
So yeah, I guess the question is, do like different ways to collect litter ever collect other, wildlife and stuff like that? That's a great question. I'm actually not too sure of like how that would like, if it like happens a lot, and if so, like how that's addressed. I'm not completely sure on that. I would imagine different ways of collecting plastic may sometimes catch other or catch organisms or things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly on that process, to be honest.
And then how do you feel about Team Seas? That I haven't heard of.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if I've heard of that either, if I've heard of that as something else. I don't know if anyone's able to give more clarification about that. I don't know. This could be completely off topic, but we do like work or talk closely with other partners that do similar like cleanup work. For example, we work closely with Ocean Conservancy. So I don't know if it has any reference to any of like that group or another like related ocean cleanup group or water cleanup group. But we always love collaborating with other folks. We provide data to Ocean Conservancy to be part of a larger set of data of litter removal from coastlines. So I'm not sure if that has to do with that, or if you're able to provide more clarification, whoever asked that question. But I don't know if it's related to any of those things.
All right. What type of advanced machinery do you use to clean the lakes? Or I think they're probably talking about more like dredging and things like that.
Yeah, good question. So with the Adopt a Beach program, we don't really use like any advanced machinery. We're truly using on the ground efforts, people, human power, just kind of showing up at the beach. The most advanced, I guess, tool we use are maybe like litter grabbers, but other than that, it's pretty, not a lot of advanced machinery, but I'm sure other organizations or partners may use, different types of more advanced things to collect litter in the lakes, but I'm not as aware of those processes.
Are there easy ways to gather small plastics or other pollutions that harm aquatic animals by consumption? So rather than just like picking it up by hand.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great question, because that really hits on part of the difficulty of this issue, is that when the plastic is really small, it's very difficult to remove. And I'm not sure if I know of any, easy ways to do that other than, certain nets that have like a small, like small grating, small netting, but that could still, that still might not catch it. So I think, that question gets at the fact that there's not a lot of ways to do it once it's really small like that. And that's why it makes it really difficult.
All right, and then this refers back to something we talked about earlier, and it says that some pollutants go through the water filter system because they are so small. And how does it affect humans, and what happens if we drink plastic particles?
Good, all really great questions. So like Melissa said, we know that plastic pollution is making its way through the food chain. We know it's, it has been found in human fecal matter and drinking water, all kinds of things. So we know it's happening. I think, a lot more research needs to be done we're not really sure so much of those impacts, both, short-term, long-term. So a lot more research needs to be done to better understand the impacts once it's in our bodies, but we know that it is getting there.
All right, and then the last question is, does your organization deal with liquid pollution like oils in the Great Lakes?
Great question. I've been with the Alliance for about 3 years now, and to my knowledge, our policy team, to deal with liquid, okay. I'm sure our work has touched on stuff like that in the past, or when it happens, or maybe we've talked to partners or weighed in on those issues. That isn't part of our direct work, like on our top federal priorities at the moment, or with our policy team that I know of. But not to say our work hasn't intersected with that type of pollution before. I know we work, a lot of times our work deals with agricultural pollution, so nutrient pollution that causes algal blooms and has different effects like that. I know that's that's not so much, I guess I could bear it. I don't know if I would say that's liquid pollution, but that's another type of pollution that we have been directly involved with on our policy team.
All right, and one more did just come in. What evidence have you found that there are any improvements by the effort as far as the Alliance goes?
That's a great question. I mean, I think at least for my work directly, a lot of it's just sort of like what we observe on the beach, just like through our cleanups and how we see beaches maybe getting cleaner, or people, making efforts in those ways. In terms of some of the other issues, I know, we probably rely on data from a lot of different partners on how different, how other issues are being improved, like things like drinking water infrastructure, algal blooms, all those things we kind of monitor and take in data from different partners on how those issues are being moved forward.
Are there any public policy wins that you guys have talked about lately? I wonder if that might help answer too.
Yeah. If you go on our website, greatlakes.org, there's a news feed, and we release a lot of press releases. So on things, for instance, like invasive carp making their way, or invasive carp threat to the Great Lakes, we post a lot of updates on legislation that's passed or funding that's passed. We've posted a lot of different updates on infrastructure funding. So there was legislation passed last year that will funnel money towards addressing wastewater and drinking water infrastructure. So there's a lot of updates like that on our website that give us hope and show that there's progress being made on these issues.
Where can you get posters about plastic pollution and protecting the Great Lakes?
That's a great question. We don't have any posters like that available necessarily. We do have our toolkit online. we have like things like press releases or flyers for Adopt a Beach program that you can feel free to use. But I love a poster about that. So if you find any, definitely let us know.
We actually have a question. It was in the chat, so it's not in the question and answer, from Mr. K. Has your org worked with any other orgs on an international level, like Canada even?
That's a great question. Yeah, the rest of our organization would have, or I would say our policy team would have more to say on how we've maybe worked with Canada and organizations in Canada around Great Lakes issues. But I know for my work specifically, we work closely with Ocean Conservancy, and they pool data internationally from all different types of cleanups, and have like historic records of litter data from all over the world. So we meet with them and are part of, you know, their efforts and send our data their way and stuff like that. So in my work, that's, I would say, the partner that comes to mind for that. But I know we've worked with other partners as well.
What happens to wastewater?
That's a great question. Lots of different things, yeah, I think happen to wastewater. One thing that we talk about at the Great Lakes is combined sewer overflow systems. So things like that, and needing updated infrastructure for wastewater, because a lot of that infrastructure is also outdated. But there's, you know, different processes that wastewater is going through. And you could find more information about that on our website as well, greatlakes.org.
Awesome. So we are unfortunately out of time today. We want to thank you for coming in and talking with us. We really appreciate it. We hope you guys all have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.